Yes, just a second for people to join. Just give a minute or so. We are on the internet, so people are joining us. And okay. Yeah. Yes, just a second for people to join. Janice, you can start.
Hello, good morning, bom dia, buenos dias. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be with you this morning. As some of you may know, I'm at COP30 in Belém. So this is why I look so sweat. It's really hot here. We are in the Amazon, and in fact, we're between two Amazons, the green Amazon and the blue Amazon. But let me tell you how grateful I am to be invited for the opening of this meeting. As said, I won't be able to stay long, but Paula, my dear colleague, will be moderating the session. But a few words that I would like to address to you. As most of you know, you're all deep ocean researchers, I believe. We are very interested as the National Institute for Ocean Research to keep moving towards a better engagement and bringing the right infrastructure in place to have a national deep ocean program running. We also know that the huge amounts, in fact, 87% of the Brazilian exclusive economic zone lies below 200 meters, and they are deep ocean environments. So enhancing scientific understanding of the deep sea environments and exploring its secrets is of paramount importance for us at INPO, in Brazil, and for the world. And to equip the less and developed regions and countries with the tools and knowledge capacity needed is what we are here for. We are here to address ocean challenges, and we are committed to do that in Brazil to the extent possible in partnership with OceanQuest. So it is under this union of purposes that we shape and empower our partnership for deep sea research. We are very grateful to OceanQuest, the whole team, and equally, even more, to our research teams in Brazil, so dedicated to deep ocean research. Let me then leave you with the substance of this workshop, but not before conveying my deepest and heartfelt thanks to José Moutinho and Professor Martin Wiesbeck, on behalf of whom I wish to thank all colleagues from OceanQuest and CAUST with regard to this great cooperation we have running. So let me kindly ask Paula to set the stage and keep the good work in this workshop. I wish you a very fruitful meeting, lots of good results, and an enhanced willingness to keep this alliance we are forging moving ahead. Just before I close, I wish to let you know that the ocean is at COP30, luckily and finally. So the discussions pertaining to climate change are addressing the oceans, and this is just to add more responsibility to our work. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice, and hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So as Janice said, we are just starting the Seamount Deep Dive 3. So in this opportunity, we are going to talk about exploring seamounts in the Southwest Atlantic, the Brazilian deep sea endeavor. To do so, I would like to start with the new program we are starting to build with a different collaboration that we call Towards an International Seamount Program. So I'm going just to share my screen. Thank you, Janice. Enjoy, Cope. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. So as I explained, we are starting a new program, and the idea with this is to highlight the importance of the role of these ecosystems around the world. So as you probably know, seamounts cover about 5 to 21% of the seafloor. Is the greater are that many terrestrial biomes in the world. Future boosted productivity, seamount induce chlorophyll enhancements and act as a breeding ground for fish stocks, supporting global fisheries, act as a migration pathways for large charismatic marine species, and influence global ocean process, nutrient cycle, carbon sequestration, ocean currents dynamics, and link deep and shallow ocean process. This ecosystem also hotspots a big biodiversity for sustainable and healthy ocean, acts as stepping stones from connectivity. So the program we are developing, the vision is to close critical seamount knowledge gaps across geology, physics, chemistry, biology, and social science, and to translate all this information into integrated knowledge into action. Our mission is to operate a multidisciplinary, standardized, and integrated research framework for systematic, comprehensive seamount knowledge acquisition and articulate seamounts' benefit for ocean health. For the outcomes, we are planning to integrate this science context with the geological evolution of seamounts' role in ocean dynamics and climate, seamount influence on biochemical cycle, ecosystem functions, and ecosystem services. To enable them, we would like to cross all with this interdisciplinary technological innovation, to run comparative studies and global meta-analysis, and finally, but not less important, to have a transdisciplinary synergy that support also participatory decision-making. The idea is to divide this program or support this program in 4 different themes. So the first one is related to geology, and we have their geological evolution, geodynamics. The second one is oceanography and biogeochemistry, where we would like to convoke people that work in physicochemical drivers, physicochemical cycles, also biology and ecology in that area, or all in relation to biodiversity, ecosystem structure and function, and social science, all that information that is related with legal, economics, social and political science. To do so, we also wanted to run something that we call that support or enable these themes. And it's about engineering, innovation of ocean and technology platforms, data science and standardization management, and interoperability capacity, where we have building, but also sharing between the different groups and the different teams, and multidisciplinary training. Of course, communication is really important at this time of the evolution of the Earth. So we need to have a really strong support to outreach and to do transdisciplinary communication, and also to support the policy making from the governance and the blue economy. So if you wanted to know more about this effort, please do not hesitate to contact us. So this is the Anna Roig email account if you wanted to know more about this endeavor. So to continue with the agenda, so let me introduce Dr. Alex Bastos, who is going to talk about a journey to geodiversity of Western South Atlantic and Equatorial Atlantic seamounts. Please, Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. I'm at the airport in Rio, so I'm going around. It's really a busy time now in Brazil, close to the end of the year. I'm going to share my screen. So can you see the screen?
Not yet. There we go. Now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So, well, so again, my name is Alex Bastos. So I'm a professor at the Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo. So I'm in Southeast Brazil. And this presentation is not only by myself, but by Pedro Menandro as well, who helped and is developing the study with him, with me we've been working on that for the past maybe 2 months now, trying to map and to define the geomorphology of the seamounts along the Brazilian margin and the Western South Atlantic, basically. So what I'm going to try to show you today is what we have been doing in terms of not only mapping the seamounts, but to kind of investigating the different geomorphology associated with the seamounts and how important they are. So it's an ongoing project. I would say it's a very preliminary results, but I want to put it in a broad perspective, as Paula just showed us about this kind of a world or global program for seamount studies. It's just a glimpse of what we are doing now here in the South Atlantic. So see, how can I move my screen? Oops. Oh, sorry. So I'm going to start with the definition of seamounts, because as Paula just said, it's about multidisciplinary approach when we look at the seamounts. So from a geoscientist point of view, which is my point of view, the seamounts are constructional features, so that the formation process are the heart of our views and definitions. So we are really interested on how a seamount is formed and how it evolves through the geological time. So the biologists are kind of looking at the seamount as habitats, and these habitats are controlled by specific ocean environments or specific oceanographic drivers, including the shape, the summit, the water masses, the process in general. So it's a different perspective, but we are working in the same environment. So the thing about the seamount is that we have to work in a multidisciplinary approach. So the definition is not a big deal if you are willing to really work multidisciplinary. So that's the point I wanna highlight here. And again, if you look at the kind of official definitions or the concepts that we have in the International Hydrographic Organization or at JABICO or any geomorphological manual, you're going to see that seamount has a specific definition. So there's kind of an isolated mountain, let's put this way, that is higher than or have a relief higher than 1,000 meters above the seabed, the surrounding seabed. A guyot is a seamount that has a top flat, or the top is flat. So it's been eroded. So you're going to see a few images later on my presentation. But we also have definitions like knoll, hill, bank that are much more related also to their height. So a knoll is a mountain or a seamount or not a seamount that is less than 1,000 meters high, and it has a rounded profile. But a hill, it has a regular shape. So anyway, we've got these different sort of definitions that at the end of the day, we have to work with them scientifically. But it's just to let you know that in geomorphology, we can follow this, or in geodiversity, we can follow these different sort of definitions. And we just have to make sure that we are always talking about the same point here. So for example, a seamount is like that, a knoll, a hill. So these are just forms that we use to describe the morphological feature we are looking at. So, and why this is important at some point. So this work is a quite interesting work by Kennedy et al. In 2019. They worked on about 350 seamounts in the Pacific, not only seamounts, but geological features in the Pacific. And they were looking for insights into difference in biodiversity across depth, region, and geological features at multiple taxonomic scales. So here is a glimpse that they pick up, for example, a bank, which is a guyot shaped with less than 200 meters water depth, the guyot, the conical seamount, and the ridge seamount, or even the emergent features like an island, that you can have an island that is a seamount that's an island, but you also can have an atoll. So these are different geological features. And one of the things that we are trying to look up now is how these geological features or their shape can influence or can be one environmental driver influencing the biodiversity, for example. In terms of the whole, or the broad importance of seamounts, we are now counting more than 40,000 seamounts in the world, in the global. It's just 2023. I'm just going to show you the work done by a few scientists. So it's a big number of seamounts. So it's a very important habitat across the ocean, Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean. So from a biological, ecological point of view, they are biodiversity hotspots and keystone habitats. From a geological point of view, they have a complex morphology during their evolution. From a physical point of view, physical processes, nutrient-rich waters can reach the surface, so upwelling process can happen, which makes it very important for a biodiversity hotspots. Also, because of the depth gradient, the seamounts can support diverse trophic interaction, fully primary productivity. And also, you can find even shallow and deep water coral habitats in a seamount. So it is one of the most important habitats in the deep ocean. And again, they can be, part of the seamount can be deep ocean or deep sea, but part of it can be even photic zone. And that's one of the things that I'm going to show here. And of course, there is a huge knowledge gap. Just you think about 40,000 seamounts with different shapes and evolution processes associated. So you can imagine how much investigation we can carry out in the next, let's say, century. Again, seamounts are also on the news, as you can see. Especially during the ocean science decade, number of expeditions are happening now. So we do have this news coming out about new seamounts that have been mapped, new species that were found in seamounts. And this is kind of let's say, the most interesting one, which is the mind-boggling about a new study that 2 years ago just mapped 19,000 new seamounts. That's why we are now close to 43 or 44,000 seamounts already mapped from different methodologies, not mapped with a multi-beam, but using global data, let's say. So one of the ways to map the seamount is to use the vertical gravity gradient, which is this curvature of the ocean surface topography derived from the satellite altimetry measurements. So this work is from 2011, and these authors, they mapped almost 25,000 potential seamounts all around the globe. The new work now in 2023, just using about the same methodology, the same approach, found 19,000 new seamounts. So they could pick another 19,000 new seamounts, and now we have a number of over 43,000 seamounts across the globe. And this figure here is just the ones that they picked for the South Atlantic. So you can see they're very much related to the mid-ocean ridge. But if you look at the Brazilian margin here, there are a number of seamounts as well that are not related or not along the mid-ocean, the mid-Atlantic Ocean flanks. There is also a work by McMillan, Lawler, and Harris in 2016, which is quite interesting because they tried to separate the seamounts from Guyot. And they also investigated where these seamounts are. So they mapped only 10,000 seamounts using bathymetric data, but they found out that 40% of these seamounts are at the EEZs. So this is also, again, for management and for conservation, a very important information for policy or for decisions, because 40% of the seamounts are at this exclusive economic zones. So it's a bit of pressure to the countries, but it's very important. And that's one of the reasons that we are talking about the Brazilian margin. So as Janice said, 80% of the Brazilian EEZ is in the deep ocean. So if you can see here, I hope you can see my pointer there. So this pink line here is the Brazilian EEZ. So 80% of this area is below 20 meters deep. So if we consider our application for the extended continental shelf, which is the black line, so we can reach 86% is the deep sea. So of course, this is a very significant result, because of course, most of the deep sea is the area that we less know, or we have less data. And this is now coming up when Brazil is doing the marine spatial planning. And we realize that most of our EEZ has basically no data. So what we have been doing, Pedro and I, is to use the bathymetric maps, testing different algorithms and approach to actually map this positive relief. So we can just pick what is above, let's say, a mean sea level in a radius or in an area. So what you can see now in red, or salmon, or whatever this color is, are not only seamounts, but also part of the fracture zones along the mid-Atlantic ridge of the area that we are picking up. So our main objective is to map and classify the seamounts according to their morphology, surround water depth, and height. So we really want to understand or to map the different shapes and different water depths of these seamounts. So we are using, as I said before, we are using a 1 kilometer or 500 meter grid resolution for that sort of approach, but we are also using higher resolution data, which are these red lines here. It's a bathymetry collected by the Navy that is available for us. And that's what we can see. I mean, at the background, we have the grid file, the 500 meters grid. But on top of that, we do have the multi-beam data. So we can, from that figure, and I'm going to show you a little bit more of that, we can see the high resolution we can get. So I'm going to show you 3 areas in the Brazilian margin, or let's say on the western South Atlantic, which is the Vitória-Trindade. Then I'm going to go to the north Brazilian ridge, and then to the Bahia Seamounts. I'm not going to talk about the Rio Grande Rise. I think there are going to be 2 presentations about the Rio Grande Rise later on. So that's the Vitória-Trindade chain. So it's a very interesting and very important seamount ridge or chain. You can say both. So the seamounts are most of them are more than 3,500 meters high. The surrounding seabed is deeper than 4,000 meters deep. So the part of the ridge is influenced by the Antarctic bottom water current, the North Atlantic deep water current, water mass. So and these reefs can go as shallow as 50 meters, 40 meters, or even 20 meters. Probably, I don't know, Hudson maybe is going to show you something about that. So we can go from the photic and mesophotic zone down to 4,000 meters deep if you start looking or working on these seamounts of the Vitória-Trindade chain. So this is the view, and then I can also, I want to show you about the different shapes of these seamounts. So we do have the Davis Bank, which is a seamount with a very flat top and a rounded top. But if you just go to the west here, you're going to see the Vitória Bank or the Vitória Seamount, which is more elongated. The Jazot Bank is also, again, very elongated, but you're going to get this conical and a bit deeper seamounts as well. So the morphology change, the origin of this seamount ridge is still a matter of debate, although there is some sort of volcanisms associated with the fracture zone, which it's not something that's very common to happen, but that's the main hypothesis so far. So there's still working going on, and at the end of the I'm going to say the eastern part or the eastern end of the ridge, we're going to find two islands basically. One is the Trindade Island, where there is a research station there. And there is a Martin Vaz, which is another island, which is basically a rock that pops up there. And the Trindade volcano is extincted now, but it's about 2 or 3 million years old, as far as I remember. But there is one thing that's quite interesting about the Dave's Bank. That's what I want to point out. The highest topographic feature in Brazil is called the Neblina Peak. The Neblina Peak is 3,000 meters high, and it's in the Amazon there, in the northern Brazil. The Davis Bank, with the seamount here, it's about more than 4,000 meters high. So actually, the highest mountain in Brazil is not, is underwater, basically. That's the point. And people just don't know that. So this is this thing that we can use to get attention from the society to understand how complex the relief or the landscape or the submerged landscape it is when compared to what we have in the continents. And people just don't know that. The other thing that we can do to investigate the morphology of these seamounts is to use the terrain attributes. Like here, we've got the morphology, the bathymetry of the Vitória-Trindade chain. But below, what we have is the slope, which is the inclination. So you can just use an algorithm to run the slope. And when you have the slope calculated, what you see here in red is the very steep areas. And this light gray or white is the flat areas. So what we can see here, you get again the bank, the Davis Bank here, you see the top is very flat, and then you have the steep flanks. But when you look at the other banks or the other seamounts, they don't have this flat top, at least at this resolution. So what you see is a conical seamount. And you can separate the circular shape from the elongated or the ridge shape and the conical shape. So what's the influence of this in terms of habitats, or in terms of the occurrence of deep water corals or biodiversity in general? So that's an open question at this point. So that's the difference I'm talking about, right? So the guyot and then the conical seamount. And now, if you get a high resolution, so we've got this multi-beam data, just a strip of data there. So in red is the grid that I've been showing you, and in blue is the multi-beam data. So we can see that there is a huge difference in terms of water depth of the top of the bank here. And then if you look at in more detail the multi-beam data, what you see, you can start looking at the specific features along the flank. And for a deep sea ecologist, this is very important. So you can plan all your research, you plan all your ROV dive using the multi-beam data. So what are these features here that are popping up from the seafloor? So this is very important that you cannot see on a 500 meters grid, but you can see on a high resolution multi-beam. So that's the thing we are trying now to, Pedro and I, to start exploring, is to use the kind of the regional grid, but also where we have the bathymetric data, we want to try to calibrate the grids with the bathymetric data. Again, these seamounts are important as they may be influenced and also influence the current patterns. So this is the global HICOM model. And if you look at this place here, because of the enlargement of the shelf, of the continental shelf, and because of the ridge, the Seamount Ridge, we do have a series of edges that are formed here. And if you look in detail, we can also see that in between two seamounts, you may have an increase in current speed as well. So the seamount is going to have a kind of a feedback process with the hydrodynamics. So we need to consider that as well in terms of the seabed morphology, the influence on numerical modeling. It's also very important to understand and to map and to have a more detailed seabed morphology. Moving to the northeast, and I'm supposed to finish in a couple of seconds. Anyway, this is the North Brazilian Ridge, which is a quite interesting and very important ridge as well. That's the area that I'm going to be a chief scientist. I'm going to do an expedition as a chief scientist end of next year with the Falco 2, the Schmidt Ocean Institute. So we're going to be looking at these seamounts here. Here, the most physical process that is related, that is acting at this area, is the North Brazilian Current that runs from east to west. And when we look in detail at these seamounts, we see again, there are different shapes and morphology. Look at this very irregular seamount here with a kind of a plateau and then a very steep flank on the other side. This one goes up to 60 meters deep only at the top, and the surrounding depth is close to 4,000 meters. So again, we see how it changes in terms of morphology from the eastern flank, from the western flank, and some have a flat top, some are more conical, and most of them are kind of a ridge or elongated seamounts. And the last one is the deeper one. Comparing the two ridges, this is a group of seamounts, and the top are 2,000 meters deep. So they are very deep compared to the Trindade and the North Brazilian ridge. They form a group, not an alignment, and they have this elongated and also very conical shape with a deep sea channel just running through them. This is a very interesting area. We basically know absolutely nothing from this area in terms of biodiversity or even their formation or the evolution of these seamounts. So just to finish up, I just want to show you something that is very important as a scientific interest as well. So these are the sea level curve for the last 800,000 years. So the blue line is the mean sea level, the modern mean sea level. So when you think about it, and considering the top of these seamounts are 50 meters deep or even less than that, so they're very shallow. During the last 800,000 years, the mean water depth in terms of sea level, the mean sea level depth is minus 50, which means that most of these seamounts were very, very shallow, like, less than 10 meters deep, or they were islands. And it makes a huge difference if you think about these areas as islands and how they will impact the evolution or the ecological processes in terms of connection between these very far away islands, offshore islands, with the mainland. So in terms of ecological processes, this is something that must be considered as well, that these seamounts during the past 100,000 years, they were islands, especially along the Brazilian margin. And there are theories like the stepping stones and other ecological concepts that can be used here, which is quite interesting. If you look at the Bahia seamounts, the last one that I showed you, they are very deep, but the ridge, very close to the coast, and at the same time, during a lower sea level, or during the past 100,000 years, they were basically islands. So we changed completely the evolution, especially of the marine biodiversity. So sorry, I just over 3 or 4 minutes, And this is our friend AI that produced this. Pedro did this figure, which is a quite interesting thing, because we have at Vitória-Trindade, that's the Trindade Island that it can go up to 5,000 meters high. The Davis Bank, which is 4,000 meters high. And if we put the Neblina Peak underwater, it would be just 3,000 meters high, which is lower than the other two that we have been talking about during this presentation. So guys, thank you very much. I'm sorry for a bit of noise that you may hear, but I'm at the airport, so but thank you, Paula. I'm sorry for being late.
Thank you. Obrigada, Alex. Fantastic presentation. Such a beautiful slides you show us today. And this remind us the importance not just to connect, like the deep areas, but also with the shallow. It's fascinating seeing all these different features in extensions, but also when you look from the shallow reefs to the deep sea ones, and enforce this, importance to coordinate this global program we are trying to develop in this, effort we are trying to run. So, and also the importance to conserve and sustainable use, the use of these ecological and economically important systems. And of course, this leaves us with the next presentation from Dr. Hudson Pinheiro about fish biodiversity and conservation on mesophotic habitats of the Vitória-Trindade Seamount chains. So Hudson, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Have been working with Alex, like he was a professor in the department where I started, so and he supported a lot of research too along the time. Really cool to be here and talk a little bit about the work that we are doing, the Vitória-Trindade chain that Alex just showed in details, the geomorphological aspects. So it'll be really nice to talk now about the fish biodiversity and the projects about conservation that we are organizing, and we are working right now in the area. So I'll share my screen now. Second here, share. Okay.
Now I can see your screen.
You can see, okay. So, can you see, Paula?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, okay, nice. So this is the region, the Vitória-Trindade chain, and just like studying, today, like I'm an assistant professor in marine conservation at the Center for Marine Biology of the University of São Paulo, CEBMAR. It is an institution in the North Shore of São Paulo. It is a specialized institute focused on science, research, and also conservation. So this is the region, the Vitória-Trindade chain, situated in the central coast of Brazil. It extends like it's 1,200 kilometers far from the coast. And as Alex showed, it's the easternmost area. We have like two complex of islands, the Trindade Island and the Martin Vaz Archipelago, that are the youngest geological features that we have in the chain. It's less than around like 3 million years old. So it's very interesting to note that the Vitória-Trindade chain, now talking about biogeography and fish biodiversity, Vitória-Trindade chain is considered a sub-province of the Brazilian biodiversity, marine biodiversity. it has some unique components of the biodiversity that makes a little different from the others. But what's interesting to note that is also situated in a transition zone, where we have here in the north, like a more north of the Vitória-Trindade Chain, we have a more tropical conditions, warm waters in the shallow, mainly in the shallow. And at south, we have subtropical conditions where we have predominance of rocky reefs. So in the north, more coral reefs and biogenic reefs with tropical fauna, and in the south, like subtropical biodiversity. So what is also interesting is the high levels of endemism. So about fish, to have at least like 14 fish species that are exclusive for this zone. So it makes a very high contribution. And these fish, like most of them are found in the seamounts and in the islands of the chain. Some species are exclusive to the islands. They inhabit the very shallow tide pools and habitats, but most of the fish are widespread. And we have been exploring, we started studying the islands in the past, but since 2011 we have done 5 expeditions to the seamounts to try to understand better the biodiversity. And in addition to discover new species of fish, when we start to do this technical diving exploration using rebreathers and other technical diving, we discovered that like more than 90% of the biodiversity of each seamount were like new records. They were not recorded before to the region. So the exploration, the work that we have been done with technical diving together with the use of ROVs and some fishing reports are very important to uncover the biodiversity of these seamounts. And even today, in the last expedition, in the Columbia Seamounts, that was one of the furthest, the closest to Trinidad Island, we discovered a new species at 120 meters depth, inhabiting the rhodolite beds there, a new fish species. So the endemism we're still discovering new species, and the endemism is getting higher with when we discover or in the studies point that these species are exclusive to this system. No, that's so in addition to discovering new species of fish, we are also discovering new habitats. Like in the seamount, in the Dade Seamount and Vitória Seamount, 2 of the largest seamounts of the chain, the seamounts like Alex told, they are mostly flat, composed by rhodolite beds, but we, in a partnership, like getting some points, some GPS coordinates with fishermen, we were able to discover and characterize new formations that we never have seen these formations before. They are like, they grow, they are based, mostly composed by coralline algae. They grow from 70, 80 meters depth to almost the surface to 12, 15 meters depth. And they are like a sponge in high complexity. They also have like a high cover of sponges and corals. But what is interesting that they shelter a lot of endemic species as well, fish species. And comparing these habitats with others from like Trinidad and many others from Brazil and the Caribbean, we found there the highest biomass of reef fish in the whole Atlantic Ocean. So they shelter, they're like oases, sheltering a very high and pristine community of fish with a very high biodiversity and still preserved. But in Trindade and in many seamounts as well, we have been reported along the time fishing and the impacts of fishing activities, mainly with people, with some fishermen that use it to fish along the islands with hook and line and long lines, and so they were. We were reporting a decrease in the sharks populations in the island, and fishermen focus on reproductive aggregations, and some species like this grouper were becoming very rare, even disappearing from some reefs in the region. So in the past, we had, in addition to the commercial fishing, Trinidad Island has a station of the Marine Navy, and we start to monitor the fishing that the Navy that spent the whole year there uh, were they were doing, like this fishing, and they were catching a lot of fish, mainly in the shallow. So we had also problem with overfishing the shallow reefs as well there. And talking a little bit about the risks, the problems for conservation in the region. And we also have a problem with mining in the seamounts. We had, like in the past, some companies had authorization to mine the Dave Seamount, and they to do a test for commercial test, and they were using the rhodolite beds and the reefs. They were mining the rhodolite beds to crush the reefs and the coralline algae to prepare like fertilizer for sugarcane plantations in Brazil. And today, right now, if we open the SIG mine, that is from the National Agency for Mining in Brazil, we have right now process. They're trying to mine the seamounts and some seamounts, the Vitória and the Dave seamounts in the Vitória-Trindade Chain, and they are now with a very advanced process for mining. They are trying to hire two very large vessels from Netherlands, from Europe. They are able to mine the seabed and the reefs in a speed of 2 knots, and their goal is to do a test mining 550,000 tons of rhodolite beds and reefs from the seamounts to do a commercial test about fertilizers in Brazil. So this is very advanced in the government, and so we are trying to trying to prepare like a proposal to try to protect these seamounts, especially this area that are in very, very high risk. So in the past, we helped the government to try to create a protected area around Trindade. There are a lot of controversies. We were proposing the protection of the islands and the seamounts inside the ZEZ, full protection of the area, but at the end, the areas, many important areas were out of protection, but we still were able to include the Columbia Seamount and Martin Vaz Archipelago inside the no-take areas of the NPA that ended up being created. What was good was one of the first seamounts that were included in a no-take area in Brazil. What's very, very important. But what about the Seamount chain? So we are trying to put together the research and information that we have to try to explain the importance of this region. So in terms of composition and by local biogeography, we know that these seamounts, Vitória, Jazer, and Daves, because they are shallow, they have these coralline hills that that has a very high diversity of species. They are very close, the composition are very close to the islands, and these islands and these seamounts have a composition that are closer to the coast, the continental coast. So they shelter very high biodiversity. And when we looked for the process that regulates the composition, we found that a stepstone process are the most important process. So the composition of one seamount, they depend on the seamounts next to each other to share some species. It's not that we have like a pool of species that comes from the coast, and the seamounts closest to the coast are more related to the continental reefs, in the shore. So we have a stepstone process that regulates the assembly of the communities along the chain. And the genetics, we studied two fish in the along the chain, collecting in 5 different seamounts. We collected 2 species, one grouper and one small damselfish, and we figured out in the both the model that indicated both was also a stepping stone model. It was very interesting that we found a larger relationship between the seamounts and the sulfur reefs in the Espírito Santo coast than the Abrolhos one that is in the north, even that the currents, the marine currents, come from the north here. And this shows the importance of the edges that Alex just showed us, show this importance for the maintenance of the biodiversity and the connectivity through the chain. But also one very interesting process that we discovered studying the genomics of the fish in the chain is that some of the endemic lineage of the dunsel fish that were exported back to the coast. So it shows that the seamounts and the Oceanic Islands, but most here, the seamounts and the Oceanic Islands, that are not dead ends for the genetic diversity, the lineage, and the endemic species. These seamounts, they are also producing genetic diversity and new species, but also being able to export back to the coast. So for most of these species, we found a higher genetic diversity on the seamounts than even in the continental shelf. And also studying the evolutionary history of the endemic species, we found that most of the endemic species are related to the Pleistocene, where we have these very high dynamic changes in sea levels. So many species are being able to reach the seamounts when they are shallower, and so they can use this the seamounts as stepping stones during certain moments, and when the sea levels come back up again, they become isolated and adapt to the local conditions and become different. So here again, we have like today, we have the chain with most composed of seamounts, with the islands situated very far, but in the lowest level, as Alex showed, we have a chain of islands, and so species can, even small species that are weak dispersers, that don't have ability to disperse very large, they can colonize, and when the sea level gets up again, goes up, the sea level goes up again, the species adapt to the new conditions and become endemic, exclusive species. So in addition to the ecological and evolutionary studies, like we have seen and compiled information about fishing, showing that this region is very important for local fishing from the south of Bahia, Espírito Santo, Rio de Janeiro, and people use the region to exploit mainly pelagic fishes, like the dourado, Coryphaena impurus, and meca, and other swordfish. So to go to the end of the talk, we are working with 2 main proposals now. One is a marine biosphere reserve called Vitória-Trindade that covers the whole chain, all the seamounts of the chain. This proposal has like about 15 years old, and in the beginning it didn't have the support of the local governments, but the last year we got the support of the governors of Espírito Santo, the local, the federal government of Brazil, and but we had to change. This was the original goal, but we have to change some the limitations of the marine reserves. But today it is being discussed already with UNESCO, the creation of this marine reserve in Brazil. But what we are working right now, we are looking for partnership, funding, and support, is a proposal for a biological reserve on top of Vitória-Trindade Seamounts and surrounded by a buffer zone that would protect the seamounts from mining and from deep fishing, and would allow in the buffer zone only pelagic fishing, and in the core areas would not allow any kind of fishing or activity, only scientific, and so it's one of most is one of the best conservation strategies of marine protected areas categories that we have in Brazil, but a long time that we don't have the creation of one biological reserve in Brazil, but the government is seen as a important is seen as an important proposal because it's an opportunity, because of low conflicts. The major conflict is a very destructive one, that is the mining. So we have we are right now working on this proposal, trying to find partners, and we also accepting support letters from institutions that are interested in protect, preserve seamounts, to try to add like these letters to the documentation that we are submitting to the Brazilian government. So the premises of these new protected areas are like premises of conservation planning, like systematic conservation planning, like complementarity, connectivity, irreplaceability, and vulnerability of the region. So we are trying to prepare like a proposal based on these premises, and that's it. Again, I'd like to thank the opportunity to be sharing the research that we are doing, and with the colleagues and with the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hudson. Great talk as well. So really interesting to see how this fish research is crucial for the understanding of this vulnerable biodiversity. And as Angel just wrote, the need also to connect these, like mesophotic, shallow environments to the deep, and how you are trying to integrate all this data to support decision-making and the possible, hopefully, creation of this biosphere reserve in the area. Really, really, really nice talk. So moving again to more biodiversity context. So I will leave the floor to Dr. Angel Perez, who is going to talk about deep sea habitats and megafauna on the slopes of São Paulo Ridge. Angel, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Very nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Angel Perez. I work in the south of Brazil, University of Vale do Itajaí. Just let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah. So I will talk about a study, an exploration of a very remote and large and very deep seamount ridge, which looks like a seamount ridge in the Southwest Atlantic. It's called the São Paulo Ridge. This study was carried on 12 years ago as part of a historical collaboration between Brazil and Japan, specifically the Japan Marine Earth Science Technology, JAMSTEC, and different marine science institutions in Brazil. And it was called the Yatapiuna Deep Sea Expedition. It was part of a larger project, which was run by Jamstack, which was called KEL 2013, The Quest for Limit of Life, which basically included a round-the-world voyage of the research vessel Yokosuka, which carries and operates the submersible Shinkai 6500. And the Yatapiuna was the South Atlantic part of this expedition that included two legs. One of them was exploring Rio Grande Rise and São Paulo Ridge, which is the one we'll be talking about. And this is Hiroshi Kitazato. He was one of the mentors of the KEL project, and he was the chief scientist in this Yatapiuna expedition. So the big star of the study was this manned submersible Shinkai 6500. At that time, there were not many submersibles like this. I think there was only 4 or 5 of them of this class. And then she's maybe almost 10 meters long and weighs 26 tons. She can make dives that takes like 8 hours long dives to a maximum depth of 60,500 meters, and carrying 3 divers, 3 people inside, 2 pilots, mostly 2 pilots and 1 scientist. So it was the first time that the Shinkai was used in the Atlantic, and was also the first time that the Southwest Atlantic region could be explored using this kind of submersibles. So why did we pick the São Paulo Ridge? There's a very interesting historical argument about this. You can see here is the 2 maps that's showing the early days of the expansion of the South Atlantic. This is the New Aptian period. It's about 120 million years ago. And as you see, the South American African plates are still very close together, and the South Atlantic is expanding from the south towards the north. So the marine environment is actually moving, filling up this gap between the tectonic plates. But in this, around this time, there was a volcanic activity that produced the São Paulo Ridge, which was a big geological feature that somehow caused an obstruction of this communication of the marine environment, obstructing the movement of seawater into this northern part, and that created a sort of a very shallow environment, a marine shallow environment, very saline and very shallow, where there was a massive deposition of evaporites, that mostly salt sediments in this northern part, which as the plates started to separate, continue to separate, again, the marine circulation was restored, but it left as a consequence these large deposits of salt in both sides, both in the South American coast and also Africa. And most of them are actually related to the important oil and gas deposits that lie underneath these salt deposits. In Brazil, we call this the pre-salt deposits. And the Rio Grande Rise was the São Paulo Ridge was very important to this formation, and delimits what was big sediment deposits that look like this today. This is the São Paulo Plateau, this very large sedimented area where the pre-salt deposits are. You can see that in this dotted line. And the São Paulo Ridge it lays just in the south that limits the southern extension of the sedimentary area. Now, if you look at the depth profile from north to south, using a seismic line that shows us not only the depth contour, but also what the sediments that lie underneath the seafloor, you can see the red line, the Seamount Ridge. So it was actually a Seamount Ridge, very irregular one. But when you look at the southern flank, it's very deep. And with the marine sediments and about 5,000 meters deep. And if you look at the northern flanks, it's buried by sediments. You can see here the blue line showing the Albion sediments, the one that I showed before, the evaporite sediments, but then all the sequence of sediments that were deposited in subsequent ages. So that's why we call the asymmetric ridge. It's really interesting when I looked at Alex's presentation that they using that methodology, the ridge does not come as a seamount, and that's probably because the form of the ridge does not show a complete peak as we see here in the red line, because of the north part is buried in sediment. So there's also another important point about this area. It has to do with interaction of the circulation of these deepwater sea masses. The North Atlantic deepwater sea mass is transported from north to south at above 3,000 meters depth, and of course is moving across these peaks. But then we also have the very dense and very cold Antarctic bottom waters that flow from south to north and very deep areas below 3,000 meters, and actually collide against the São Paulo Ridge and start flowing parallel to the ridge, and actually does a process of excavation and forms this sort of a channel or moat that we can see on the foot of the southern flank of the ridge. So looking at this picture, we decided to explore this depth gradient of the southern flank, which not only shows us some important features related to depth itself, but also to the interaction of these two water masses. And we started by, of course, describing the seascape. And the first step is to map using, as Alex showed us before, high resolution bathymetry. We mapped the entire structure. It's 350 kilometers long. And you can see the southern flank here. Oh, let's see if I can get a pointer here. Just a second. No, I don't know how to do this. And you can see the southern flank and the very deep channel in pink here is about 4,000 or 4 to 5,000 meters deep. And you can see the cliff that towards the north until the peaks of the seamounts, and these peaks are around a lot of the sediments of the São Paulo plateau. And we also transformed this bathymetry information into different types of terrain variables that we can use to classify the geomorphology of the areas, and it's classified into some structural classes that are kind of proxies for different kinds of benthic habitats that we can sort of predict. And so, and this box here that you see on the left is the area that we chose to conduct the dives, and we used you can see in the small map here a sequence of 5 dives that we carried on, mostly from the bottom to the peaks of this part of the São Paulo Ridge. And so we dove, and starting to the most deep areas of the São Paulo Ridge, and moving into the foot of the ridge, where we start our exploration, climbing that 2,000 meters range of the ridge cliff. And what we have here is the first part of the study. We continue to describe the seascapes, but now in the smaller scale, the scale that we could see with the cameras of the Shinkai. You can see to the right the temperatures of the water masses distribution along this depth range. You can see that the temperature here is a red line. You can see that the deepest parts below 3,500 meters, you find the Antarctic bottom waters that are very cold, from 0.4 to 1 degrees Celsius. And as you approach about 3,000 meters, there is a rapid increase in temperature. It's where you get the transition to the North Atlantic deep water, where temperatures range between 2 and 3 degrees. And in this area between 3,000 and 3,500, we understand that there was the most important mixing zone between the two water masses that overlay. And you can see down in the blue graph, the blue dots here below, these are sigma t. These are the variability of the density, and exactly at this depth you can see a high variability, which is showing us that the water water masses are mixing in this area, which seems to be a very important aspect related to the benthic biological communities. And we also describe, of course, the substrates that we could see in the image, and we classify them according to different criteria. And you can see in the very deep areas here the biogenic mud with a lot of debris. But then we go up the hill, climbing this cliff, and you see more rugged environments with rocky substrates. And this is a crest. What you can see here is the letter D, which is a very important part of the cliff that follows a more flat area, a mud flat, and then a very gentle slopes up to the hill again. So we describe different substrate types, which was one of the components of the seascapes at smaller scale. And of course, we looked at the life forms that we could see around in these areas. When we actually found about 914 organisms, which is not very much, of epibenthic and benthic-pelagic megafauna. Most of them were sessile suspension feeders, like sponges and anthozoans, but not in this first part of the reach, the deepest part, where fauna was really, really rare. And mostly, as you can see here, the mud, the biogenic mud, it looked like ice cream. And you can see very few organisms, and most of them were echinoderms, like this Brizingid starfish, the Novodynia. But you don't see many of them. But we also see some large animals like fish, and this is Spectrunculus, one ophidiform that's quite large, almost a meter long animal in this area, again, with very low density of megafauna. But when we move to the upper parts of the cliff, like above 3,000 meters, then we, of course, the seascape changed. You can see now this crest and these outcrops quite clearly, and you can see a larger diversity of fauna. Most of them sponges. I can see here. You will see in this little video that will show there will be some this brownish and orange sponges. This is Polypogon amadou. It's one of the most common sponges in this area. But you will also see some very tiny ones. You can see on the picture to the left of this very little sponge called Euplectella, a very long and very flexible one, which is probably the densest organisms in this region. Apart from these sponges, we could also see fish and larger animals. This is Acanthonus armatus. It's another ophidiform. It's got this weird skull, this head that's very bony head, like a helmet. That's where this name comes from. And of course, my favorite is Cyrid octopus. One of the Cyrodoctopus that we did find in this region, the Cyrothoma murray. It's a very beautiful animal, and actually it's one of the, I think it's the only cephalopod that's considered to be blind. It's very tiny eyes, which is very different. Most of cephalopods are very large eyes, but this is considered to be the only one that's considered to be blind. Okay, so, but we don't only describe habitats and fauna, we also have to try to understand why this megafauna or these life forms distribute in this area. And to do that, we considered first approach is to consider a very large scale drivers at a regional scale, more than 1,000 kilometers. And considering that, we have to consider that the faunal abundance and diversity mostly are highly related to the amount of energy that reaches the seafloor. And that relates to the primary productivity on the surface and the rate of sinking of this organic material down to the seafloor where these animals can use it. And so this is a map with POC flux, is the particulate organic carbon flux, which normally relates pretty well with the abundance of deep benthic fauna. And you can see that there's big blue areas in this map, which are the very poor areas where the primary productivity on the surface is low, and consequently the flux of particulate carbon down to the seafloor is also very low, and we could not expect a very abundant benthic fauna in these deep areas. And that's here where we are. It's the average is 0.02 to 0.03 individuals per square square meters that we find in the São Paulo Ridge. Now, if you compare this to other low productivity areas, like we are in the South Atlantic subtropical gyre, but if you compare this to the North Atlantic subtropical gyre or even the Caribbean, we see that this density is not that different from these areas, which are also poor areas, and there's low flux, PUC flux also in these areas. But if you do compare to very productive areas of the high level of PUC flux, then you can see that the benthic fauna reported in these areas is much higher, maybe 10 times higher, as you can see here, 0.6 individuals per square meter. But of course, we looked at this fauna at a much smaller scale, at the mesohabitat scale that goes from tens of meters to 1,000 kilometers. And you can see here that despite our average density is kind of low, if you look at this density going through the uphill, up the São Paulo Ridge, we can see regions where it's more concentrated. So if we look here, looking at depth only and depth strata, as you can see in the left figure, we can compare the densities of the megafauna that we observed in the videos or in the images produced by Shenkai across this depth gradients. And you can see that above 3,000 meters, the density increases very much, and compared to the area below this depth. And that's not only depth, that's also, we have to consider that's where we can have the influence. We move from the influence of a very cold water mass coming from Antarctica, with Antarctic bottom water, to a kind of warmer water mass coming from the North Atlantic deep water. Then we can also look at the variability of density now across the different types of habitats or different kinds of seascapes that we have shown before. And we can see again that's not only depth, or only the water masses, but the fact that there's a region here between 3,000 and 3,500 meters where the densities are much higher than the other parts, the shallower and deeper parts, of course. And this area specifically has a particular habitat, which is we call the crest, or the rocky crest, I think. But not only that, this is exactly the depth that I showed you before, where the two water masses are mixing, and there's a high variability of density. And this seems to be in other parts of the world a very important process to the distribution, especially of suspension feeders that will take advantage. We concentrate suspended food and improve the growth of these kinds of organisms. So that's maybe why we see more concentrated megafauna, especially those sponges in this area. So in this small scale, we can see drivers that are related to geomorphology, are related to habitat, also related to the water mass, that are promoting the concentration of deep sea fauna. But then again, of course, we can look at the even smaller scale, the macro habitat scale, which goes to tens of meters. And we did find a concentration of life that goes, was very small and extremely rare. This is a whale fall that we hit only by pure chance. I could say this is like finding a needle in a haystack, but it's actually more difficult than finding a needle in a haystack. But we did found this is actually a whale fall, a number of whale bones of minke whale at a depth of 4,200 meters. I think it's still the deepest record of a natural whale fall in the world. And this is the work by Paulo Sumida, a scientist from the University of São Paulo, that actually published this finding of this expedition. And you can see here, what happens is that when a whale falls, a big animal falls at this depth, it goes through different phases. The first phase is the predators and scavengers will devour the whole meat. But then there's a second phase where the bones and the fat that covers the bones are consumed by bacteria, chemosynthetic bacteria that would produce a particular source of energy, which is not photosynthesis, chemosynthesis. And this source of energy will last for a few years and attract a specialized fauna, as you can see here, I'll show you again. Most of these megafauna that you can see here are specialized to this kind of chemosynthetic environments. They use this bacteria. You can see the white mats here are bacteria that's growing on the bones. And they either eat the bacteria or they have symbionts. You can see it's the zombie worm. It's a special worm that grows inside the bones and eats the bones, basically. So this is a very particular part. Again, is a very, very small area. We found almost 40 species there. And the density calculated for different species goes to 2 to 7 individuals per square meter. So compared to the average that we showed before, 0.02 individuals per square meter, to this tiny area where there's a particular source of energy that concentrates 10 times more than 10 times the fauna of the ridge. So that's the importance of you considered all these different scales to understand what drives biodiversity in this kind of deep areas. And again, just to tell you, going to the end now, just to tell you a very cool story, we also found another whale bone, but this one was fossilized. Also, this is about 2,000 meters deep along the cliff. And you can see there is only the skull. And the skull is covered by cobalt crusts. And we actually, this is a very large piece, of course, and we actually were able to retrieve this skull, and it ended up in Japan, where it got really well studied by specialists on whale evolution. And it turns out that this whale is a beaked whale, Ziphidae. It was basically, it was estimated the age of this animal died about 5 million years ago. And is an extinct species, and it was actually a new species in science. It was called Africanacetus gracilis, I think. And the fun thing is that the way that they aged this bone was considering the cobalt crusts, because we know that the crusts are deposited at a rate of 1 millimeter per million years. So by measuring this crust on top of the bone, they were able to know at least from which time the bone was exposed to the chemical environment and got this cobalt crust cover on it. So this is a nice paper that was published describing all this story and with a model that tells you how probably this whale died 5 million years ago. It turned into this fossil. But the coolest story is that after 10 years, all our friends from Japan made a big effort to send this skull back to Brazil, because most of the samples that we got in this expedition, they ended up in the National Museum in Rio de Janeiro. The National Museum is one of the most important natural history museums in the world, and it actually caught on fire a few years ago. It was a big tragedy, and most of our samples from this expedition were destroyed. And of course, our friends from Japan, they made this big effort to send it back, this bone, to Brazil. It just arrived a few months ago to the museum as a collaboration to restore the collections of the museum. This is a picture here. This is the curator of the museum, and this is when it arrived at the National Museum. It's probably going to be exhibited there, and hopefully they tell this nice story for the people that visit the museum from now on. So this is my last slide, and I show you here, before I forget, this is a map that we produced on board, and these are all notes and sketches made by Dr. Kitazato as we were studying the area, as we were conducting the dives, where he was pointing and noting his theories and ideas and processes he thought were going on, and which we could, after the trip, looking at all the data, all the images, we could mostly prove they were actually important drivers of biology. So this reminds me, this is how science is made in the deep sea. We don't have a lot of opportunities to do experiments there. And we mostly have to think of what you're seeing as you conduct the dives and try to create your hypothesis, biological, geological, all interacting disciplines, and try to demonstrate with the data afterwards. So this was a great honor to be with him in this trip, and actually helped me to become a deep sea scientist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angel. Very, very nice presentation, and thank you for let us know how the importance of the understanding of slope and the in general seafloor geomorphology shape the megafauna distribution, and how this feature is key to create, like currents, different habitats, resources that structure communities, and the importance to integrate all this knowledge, even the fossil material you show us with the Seamount research to strengthen the ability to interpret biodiversity, not just across, like landscapes, but also across large periods of time. So now we move to continue with megafaunal community structure on ferromanganese crust and surrounding areas at Rio Grande Rise. This talk is provided by Dr. Paulo Vinícius. Paulo, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Okay, thank you.
In the meantime, please do not forget to post your questions. After this talk, we will have a discussion and questions and answer session with all the presenters.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, please.
Awesome,
Go ahead.
thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Paulo Correa. I thank you very much for the invitation to present at this webinar. I really appreciate this opportunity to present in this panel. So I'm going to talk the megafauna community associated with the ferromanganese crust and the surrounding areas at Rio Grande Rise. So today's webinar is focused on seamounts, but Rio Grande Rise and this entire feature is not technically a seamount. Instead, it's a very large and complex geomorphological feature that is located at east of Brazil, between the Brazilian and the continental margin, the Brazilian continental margin and the mid-Atlantic ridge. It covers nearly 500,000 square kilometers. It's almost the size of France or Spain, and ranges depths from 600 to 5,000 meters. So there's still a significant debate regarding the origin of Rio Grande Rise. So for example, there's this major reef structure here that geologists, they try to discuss how that originated. And there's also main evidence that this whole area was above sea level in the past. Also, the Brazilian government has shown considerable interest in Rio Grande Rise because of the presence of ferromanganese crust and the potential for mining of hard earth elements. So in this photo here is a crust that we collect in the area. We can note the dark part here, that is the ferromanganese layer that is deposited over millions of years. And currently the Rio Grande Rise is in international waters, but the Brazil has submitted a claim to the CLCS to extend its EEZ and include this region. One of the main problems about Rio Grande Rise is the limited biological information available for this area so far. We know there has been some commercial fishing in the area, particularly targeting alfonsino, blue sharks, swordfishes, and a few others. In 2019, our group published a paper compiling all biological records available in the literature up to 2017. We searched the OBIS and GBIF database and found only about 200 species recorded for the region, which is an extremely low number considering the size of the Rio Grande Rise. And most of these records were pelagic with very few benthic observations. And there's also a few global habitat suitability models for deep sea corals. And when we look at these models for the area, we can see many regions that are considered suitable for both hard and soft corals. So there was an expedition at Rio Grande Rise conducted by Janstech. That's the expedition that Angel talked about. There is a collaboration between the Japanese and Brazilian researchers. So during this expedition, they carried out a few dives with the Shinkai submersible at the Rio Grande Rise. These dives and it was very interesting because these dives documented for the first time communities dominated by Sarostegio culata, which is a sponge that mimics the shape of the hard corals, as we can see in these images here. We can see that the sponge also forms a three-dimensional framework similar to corals, creating an habitat for many other organisms. And those sponge gardens in this area is something that I believe was not documented for any place before for this particular species. After a few years, there was another project called the Marine Tech. There was a more recent collaboration with Brazil and UK. In this project, the team visited Rio Grande Rise in 2018 during 2 cruises. During those cruises, we conducted rock dredges to collect ferromanganese crusts and the associated fauna. We carry out ROV dives as well and perform some multi-beam surveys. So because of the time constraints, we focus our efforts on a relatively small section in the center of the rise that we can see here, and collecting data from both the north and the south sides of the rift here. So about 30% of the specimens that we collected, representing 54 species, were associated with Sarostegia culata and other corals. For example, we found polychaetes associated with zoanthids and black corals, living both on the surface of the corals and inside them as well as a polynoid living inside the lumen of the Sarostegia culata. Among arthropods, the most common examples were barnacles attached to Enalpsamia rostrata, that's a coral, and these aquathoracic cirripedes that was living inside the skeleton. And we made a permanova test, and it showed that both sides of the rift and depth significantly explain the difference in the community structure of these collected specimens. In this bar graph here, we are looking at relative abundance by phylum, separated in the north and south rift. On the north side, we see a higher abundance of Annelida, Arthropoda, and Echinoderms. And in contrast, the south side shows a higher abundance of Poriferae and Cnidaris. On the left here, there is an NMDS ordination of the same data, where each point represents a rock dredge that was sampled. And you can see clearly this separation between the north and south sides of the rift. So during the Marine Tech, we also have some additional ROV dives that were conducted that provide more footage of the seafloor. These videos were analyzed for habitat classification, and megafauna organisms were annotated and identified to the lowest taxonomic rank as possible. And here we can see in this video that the same thing that happened to Shinkai, we also were able to see those gardens, sponge gardens of Sarostegia culata. We recognize a total of 11 habitats, which are shown in this image. These habitats were classified based on depth, slope, and substrate type. Here you can see some examples, such as soft sediments with ripple marks here and here. Also, we have some ferromanganese crusts along the rift margin, some crusts of pavements in the plateau of the rise, and some calcareous pavements as well. And we were able to know that we can see a very high heterogeneity of habitats in this studied area. I perform a cluster analysis to identify the groups of communities with, this results in 6 groups labeled A through F. In this image, in this image here, we can see the most abundant species in each group. So we have in group A, Umbella patis, that's a black coral. In group B, the most dominant species was a hard coral, Enalpsamia rostrata. Group C was dominated by Sarostegia culata. Group D, the most abundant was a sea urchin, Glacinicinus. Group E, we have a glass sponge, Afrocalids. And in group F, you have a black coral, Funnus trichopatis as well. So this slide shows an NMDS plot, plot with the color represents the regions where the ROV dives took place. Here we can see the map where they match the color of the NMDS plot. In this ordination, the southwest and northwest regions are dominated by the Aphanosticopathes and Afrocalistes, respectively. They also are different from the center and south regions. They are named here in this map. So the only exception are areas from the rift wall. In this case, both the north and the south rift wall are grouped together here in this inside this red circle, which are areas dominated by the Sarostegia. So overall, we see that we observe a different fauna compositions across the regions, which is similar to what we found with the collected specimens. In this slide, we are looking at the same NMDS plot again, but now the colors represent different substrate types. I simplified these in three categories. Ferromanganese crusts shown in red, other hard substrates in blue, and soft sediments shown in green. And we can see in this plot two main patterns. First, there is a clear separation between most communities found on the crust and those found on other hard substrates. So communities dominated by Sarostegia and Afrocalistes were mostly associated with crusts, and communities dominated by Glacilicinus and Alopsemia and Aphanosticopathes were most commonly observed on the other hard substrates. And second, the same substrate type can roast different type of communities depending on the region where it occurs. And this regional effect is highlighted here by these black dashed lines in the plot. So another tool that can help us to understand the distribution of species in a given region are called species distribution models, or SDMs for short. These models use environmental variables and occurrence data to predict where species may occur in areas that have or have not been sampled yet. We can also combine multiple modeling approaches, and the advantage of this technique is that it uses different algorithms to capture distinct patterns and trends in the data. So in this way, we can retain algorithm-specific insights while producing a single, more robust prediction. Here in this slide, I present a species distribution model using the Sarostegia oculata as an example. I select this species because of its ecological importance and its strong association with areas containing ferromanganese crusts. So those maps here, they show the predicted distribution for each model. The red areas indicate a higher suitability for Sarostegia, and the blue areas indicate a lower suitability. And across all models, we observe a high suitability along both sides of the rift, indicated by the number 1 here in these maps, and also in a high suitability in some southern regions, indicated by the numbers 2 and 3 here. So these models, they are very powerful tools for guiding conservation policies and helping us understand species distribution across the region. However, this map highlights how small is the area that we mapped for this project so far here in comparison with the whole Rio Grande Rise. So this reinforces the importance of continuing to map these regions with fine-scale bathymetry so that we can eventually build more reliable models for the entire extent of the area. And of course, the same methods can also be applied to many other regions where there's a need for conservation and management, including seamounts. A new and rapidly emerging tool for studying this deep sea fauna is the use of artificial intelligence to automatically identify organisms from ROV images. So as we continue to collect more data from the Rio Grande Rise or any deep sea environment for that matter, manual annotation becomes increasingly time-consuming and more label-intensive. So developing those AI tools to assist in this process is become very helpful, as they can greatly increase the volume of video researchers are able to analyze. This will be especially important as we expand exploration across Rio Grande Rise, and other deep sea regions as well. So in this table, I have an example. We're looking at results from the AI model that training with images from Rio Grande Rise. For this data set, we are only annotated a few species, the ones that were most abundant in the videos. So the values in green in this table show the numbers of and percentage of organisms that the model correctly identified in the test subset. And the values in red right below represent false positives, which are the case where the model detected an organism, but it wasn't actually present there. Overall, the model performed very well. Almost 99% of the real observations were correctly detected, showing how useful this kind of tools can be for image and video annotations in deep sea environments. But we see some large numbers in red for a couple of species, like for Afrocalites and Sarostegio oculata. So these false detections happened mainly because we did not annotate other similar looking soft corals and glass sponges as well in this data set. And since the model had limited categories to choose from, it ended up incorrectly detecting and labeled those organisms. We also noticed that the model labeled many that were falling Sarostegias oculatus individuals, which contributed to the false positives as well. This is still a work in progress, but the results so far are very promising, and they highlight the potential for AI tools to greatly speed up future annotation efforts. So in conclusion, our results show the community structure of the Rio Grande Rise follows a distinct pattern that vary by region and substrate type. We observe different communities on each side of the rift and other regions, as well as a clear difference between the habitats without ferromanganese crusts on them. So it's important to highlight that the area sampled in this study represents only a small portion of the Rio Grande Rise. So therefore, the true diversity of species and habitats is likely much greater than what we are able to document so far. Deep sea sponges and corals play a central ecological role in these habitats, as they were dominating most of the communities we observed. And their slow growth and long life histories make these ecosystems highly vulnerable to potential impacts of deep sea mining and any associated disturbance that this may cause, which are low potential for recovery. So this slide brings a few points that help us think about whether the Rio Grande Rise is similar or not to Seamount from an ecological perspective. First, we see lots of habitat-forming sponges and cold water corals, which is something that we usually associate with seamounts. And this great exposure and actually many can attract many other species. We also found aggregations of fish, which again fits the pattern we often see around seamounts. Another point is the different areas of the Rio Grande Rise host very distinct communities. So there's not just a single community for the entire area. So this kind of patchiness is typical of seamounts ecosystem, where we often see different communities near the summit or based on the side of the seamount that we are looking at. We also observe a high diversity on the hard substrates. These hard substrates are usually a limiting resource from which sensile organisms use, so they can fix themselves. And often this is a resource that is provided by seamounts and the Rio Grande Rise as well. And finally, because these habitats are scattered and interconnected, conservation really needs a network approach. So protecting only one spot in this area wouldn't be enough. And seamounts often require the same approach, as they have different communities, and conserving, you can not just conserve a single seamount in a ridge, for example. Overall, even though Rio Grande Rise isn't a seamount in in strictly geological terms, it has many similarities ecologically, which highlights its importance. So, and that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and feel free to ask if you have any questions.
Thank you, Paulo. Very nice and very important to show us how these ferromagnetic crust often differ sharply, from those in surrounding soft sediments, and reflecting how this substrate type and mineralized hard ground shape habitat availability and species composition, and also how this important, to recognize these contrasts is essential for understanding deep sea biodiversity and for linking these seamounts with mineral-rich areas of study. Thank you so much for sharing us your findings. So now we will move to the questions and comments session. We already have some of them that they were sent to Alex, and he replied already on the board. And now we have a question from Angel. Angel, the deep sea almost always looks like a barren landscape, but how much life do you think is around in the deep that is not visible in the video footage? Could you do some epimethod skid sampling of box cores to get an idea about the tiny creatures like isopods, for instance?
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, definitely. When we look at all the samplers have their particular part of the biota that they do a good job and showing us the abundance and diversity of fauna, but they always all have a part of the biota that they just don't represent. And in the case of the images, we only look at the epibenthic animals and large animals like megafauna. We don't look at the smaller ones because they are not visible in the images. But yes, definitely, if we look at the endobenthic animals, the infauna, then we can see a completely different picture in most of these habitats. We did took some of the core samples in during that expedition, and I don't really know how, if they were studied or ended up being analyzed, but I just know some information that they were very poor in terms of small crustaceans and infauna animals. But for sure, if we can analyze the fauna that are living within the sediments, we may have a different picture of what we see in megafauna. That's totally right.
Thank you, Angel. Another question for you. Is Jose Neto. So he's saying, Angel, we have seen mostly examples from the Vitória-Trindade Ridge and the Rio Grande Rise. What are the differences and similarities to the other seamount systems in Brazil, such as the Bahia Seamounts or the Northern Brazilian Ridge, namely in terms of biodiversity?
Yeah, that's a very important question, but that's the question that remains quietly unanswered, because most of these areas were not actually studied with using any kind of this new technology. So when it comes to the Vitória-Trindade Ridge, it's very important example that we see Hudson showing us how well it's the mesophotic areas being studied and described and analyzed. But if you go below the 200 meters, you just have absolutely no data, or maybe some accidental data due by some catches by dredges and things like that, which gives us some idea of biodiversity, but no picture taken in none of these deep habitats. And I have no idea of any other seamount in the Bahia Seamount Ridge or even in the Northeast Seamount Ridge that we have this kind of comparable data that I showed you, that Paulo Vinícius showed us before in these areas. Not that I know. We actually have a very nice study on mesophotic habitats in the northern seamounts as well, because they're easier to study, they are shallower, and you can have these technologies like camera technology being used in a shallower environment. So it's working, and we actually very happy to see these habitats and this biodiversity. But when it goes to the flanks of the seamounts, then that's a big mystery. We could only see We could only have these opportunities with these international collaborations, such as the one Paulo described before, and that's it. So we're not fighting and trying to make a big effort to study, starting with the Vitória-Trindade Ridge, to go and have a first cruise that we can actually use an ROV or any other image systems to get these images and try to prove there's a comparable biodiversity in these areas as well.
Thank you, Angel. So this question goes to Hudson. Do you have comparable data before and after the mining pilot project? Any data of the rate of regeneration of the biodiversity of the mined seamounts?
Paula, could you please repeat the question for me?
Yes, for sure. Do you have a comparable data before and after the mining pilot project? Any data of the rate of regeneration of the biodiversity of the mined seamounts?
Yeah, no, we don't have any previous like a BASI study. In this trip, in this expedition that we did this year, we found some regions that seem to be, that could have been mined before because there were kind of habitat destruction. Like we have some videos that we have like an idea, but it's all exploration, you know, we are still finding new sites, mapping, assessing the communities ecologically, still finding new species. So we don't have like any BASI. If this new licensing project, if it gets like approved right now, because it's being, we are working with the environmental agents right now, so providing information to them to make the best decision for the region. And if they end up allowing the mining, so the position to mine, and we know some coralline hills that are inside these areas, specific areas where they are going to mine. So we will be able to do a BASI now that we have the information about the mining regions, exactly the mining regions. And so we have like the possibilities, but it's still very hard. Like these seamounts, the Vitória is 150 kilometers from distance and from the coast, and Davis is about 600 kilometers far from the coast. So the next expedition that we are planning is on March, but we are still looking for partnerships and funding for doing like long-term projects, you know, like the boats are still small, and we improvise a lot with the boats, but we are being able to bring like small ROVs and to dive. And we are also interested now in launch some roofs that are stereo video cameras that attract large predators and rare species to try to understand better like the biodiversity of these regions.
Thank you, Hudson. I also have a question about the license. You showed that they already run some pilots, but to do so, they already have the license to do that trial or that.
What do you mean? Like if the companies have
Yes,
the
if they
license?
already have some license to run the
Yeah.
trials you show us.
Yeah, so the first time that we heard about the mining was in 2012. We had just done an expedition there in 2011 where we discovered the coralline hills. We were able to do initial mapping. We did a lot of fish biodiversity collections. Was the time that we found like that 90% of our records were new records for the region, because the only information that we had before were from like long lines, big fish. So at the time when we were diving there and seeing like small herbivores, invertebrates, small fish that don't come in the long lines, everything were new records for the region. So we found a very high biodiversity. And in 2012, there was a publication in Revista FAPESP about this project. So one company was allowed to mine for 2 years the seamounts to do commercial assessment of the viability of the commercial assessment for the fertilizer. And then they were not allowed to do any more mining before. And now they are upscaling super, like for now they want to do a very larger test, like mining 550,000 tons of rhodolite beds and coralline hills environment to crush and do this fertilized for phosphorus and calcareous. So because of the Ukrainian and Russian war, Brazil is short in fertilizers because they were one of the biggest exports from Brazil. And many companies are now trying to press the Brazilian politicians and environmental agents to allow the mining of the seamounts in Brazil. So it's a really, really bad moment from
This
seamount
is
in Brazil.
it is a big challenging, if you are trying to establish or to propose a reserve or a marine protected area in terms of marine spatial planning, and of course in the zonification, if there is already some, like mining initiatives going on. So good luck. Good
Thank
luck
you
with
very
that.
much.
So thank you, Hudson. So we have another question for Paulo. Paulo, which software or algorithm are you using for automatization of artificial intelligence based detection of taxonomy classification? And if this is an open source?
So yes, it is. We use the YOLO V8 model. It's an open source model, and you can use it if you have like some knowledge in Python. And yeah, that was the model. There's some platforms that provide this model, usually in a nice interface view, where you can just train data with a few clicks. Usually those are paid, but the model itself is open source and it's public.
There is already a publication about the framework of the methodological or the scripts of the software?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Thank you.
Not for for this project, no, but for other areas, studies, there are some publications, yes, using this particular model for deep sea environments.
So it will be nice if you let us know or posted here the papers or the documents where we can have a look.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to search.
Thank you. So I see here they're not. Yes, that's another one. So this is a question from YouTube live stream viewer, Sabrina from Rio de Janeiro. What could be the top conservation priority for the next few years, considering the most recent finding on Brazilian seamounts? So I guess it's a question from all of you guys. Who wants to answer?
I can start by saying mostly what I just said before. I think that, of course, what Hudson tells us is that they have a very important understanding of the distribution and evolution of animals that are associated with seamounts. So of course, they have a very complete case now to produce what they are producing, the systematic planning and proposing a very concrete conservation action. But I suppose that we again are not looking enough, or maybe just not looking at all, to the deep areas where we expect to have in most of the seamounts concentrations of cold water corals systems. Like we do see a lot of those systems in the slope in the region, the continental margin, especially areas where you do have oil and gas exploration in Brazil. So there's a very very large knowledge on the distribution of cold water corals in the on the slope regions, but just not enough around the seamounts. And that's probably if we look, we'll find these components there, these systems there, which will of course make a very good case for conservation of the seamounts. But we just have to prove they are there.
Thank you, Alan. Someone else wants to add something else to respond to Sabrina? No? Okay. So I think that's the last question we have. So I invite you to stay tuned to everyone for our next Seamount Deep Dive session, and it's coming up soon. So please do not miss the opportunity to have this option to interact with the top scientists and to have new questions, and also that hopefully, support conservation in all around the Latin American region. So saying that, with thanks to all of you to be here, and for our presenters for the fantastic talks they provide today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. Very nice to see you again.
Nice to see you all. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation.
Okay,
for sure.
bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Cheers.
All right, thank you. Cheers.